Hey everybody, Jason Bermas here, and I am extremely excited to bring you this next piece because, especially this year, when so many have claimed to awaken to a globalist, World Economic Forum, Davos type agenda, the quote unquote Great Reset, to have so many be in ignorance of the meeting that I would argue really directs what Davos and this globalist agenda is, to the point where it was not covered by any mainstream media outlet significantly this year until a day plus into the event, and by really a pioneer in the field and somebody I greatly respect. You know, he got into this kind of as a goof, and we'll go over it, but he has become what even the mainstream media would have to say is the authoritative source on the Bilderberg group, as he is one of the very few journalists that, number one, is in the mainstream, and number two, goes to these meetings every single year. But this year, they held it that much tighter to their chest, or we would have probably met up for the third time, Charlie, because I'm sure you would have been down there to cover it. It is Charlie Skelton. He has recently written this piece that, in a dark, nuanced way, is probably one of the most poignant and funny pieces. Bilderberg reconvenes in person after 2-year pandemic gap. And I got to say, Charlie, you know how serious I take these things, but that I'm a regular guy and I like to have a good time. And you really hit home with a lot of dark humor in this one. Like, maybe you've always had that in these pieces, but this one was especially so. So congratulations on that, sir. Take it from here, man. How you doing?
I'm very well, and it's good to know that I'm managing to hit a poignant note in my piece. So I don't know. I mean, what would you say is poignant about it? Out of interest, because
Well,
I it was only like it was my best effort to kind of just do a very quick look through the list and the agenda. But
well, I liked a lot about it. You know, first of all, Kissinger being there and the way that you handled that scenario, right? Also talking about and highlighting Palantir, which we'll get into, because Palantir, Roy Karp, the CEO, which again is kind of a Peter Thiel deal, right? And if you know anything about Thiel and Palantir and the military-industrial complexes, contracts they not only have here but globally, it's a big deal because they're big on surveillance and data. And he's literally just coming from Zelenskyy. They're both there, right? Thiel on the board, on the steering committee. He's there year in and year out. And clearly they're setting policy, right? The other thing that I thought was tremendous, right? And we'll highlight this in a moment. But you pointed out how this is supposed to be an informal kind of a meeting, right? It's informal. Yet here you have people at Bilderberg. And when I say people, I mean the head of NATO that's there, you know, the head of the CIA is there as well. All these people meeting with what? The prime minister to try to get them for an application into NATO, which is causing global conflict. They're admitting this. I mean, he's telling us that we're in Ukraine for the long haul. These are clearly people setting policy. You say that not in tongue in cheek, but rather directly throughout the article, and no one's covering it. And the way that you handle that, I think that was what was impressive about that article. You fit a lot in.
But that meeting was the thing that Stoltenberg tweeted out, and I mentioned the fact that on Twitter that the most coverage really that anyone was giving it was Jens Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, by tweeting out a picture of him having a meeting with the Prime Minister of Finland, and. Hang on, I'm just looking at my and so you've got this very bizarre situation where he's providing more inside information, or more information at all than almost every newspaper. It's just crazy, and that what you see there is a proper important high level diplomatic meeting. You know, they're talking about bringing Sweden and Finland into NATO, and this is something that's taken place at Bilderberg for decades, which is actual diplomatic meetings. So you can actually, like, Kissinger's been going so long that you can read now declassified memos from Kissinger where he'll be saying, "Oh, I'm going for a meeting with the Prime Minister of whatever, Germany or whatever, at Bilderberg," and they're talking, and you can see them doing private memos, going, "Yes, we're going to be discussing so and so and so and so at Bilderberg, blah 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 blah." So it's very disingenuous as well that they say that everyone attends in a private capacity. I think that's, apart from anything else, we found out that that's not the case. And as long ago as God, when was it? 2011 or something? Maybe it was at St. Moritz, where George Osborne, the Chancellor of the Exchequer of the UK, was there, and we rang the. I spent half a day on the phone to the Treasury in the UK, saying, George Osborne is here. In what capacity is he attending? And eventually they said he's attending in the capacity of Chancellor of the Exchequer. There are people there. They aren't in there. They aren't there as individuals, which is what the Bilderberg website says. They're there as as prime ministers, as party leaders, as European commissioners, and it's ridiculous to suggest they're not.
Thank you, and that's what I want to talk about, because it really speaks so much to the society we live in right now. And one of the highlighted topics that Bilderberg had in 2018, and that was the post-truth world and the inversion of reality. And let's talk about this, because they say they're under Chatham House rules as individuals. Yet, you can now even go into, you talked about paperwork that's being published, right? You can go into the Trilateral Commission's own documentation on how it originated. And it is clearly stated that it is from the Bilderberg group refusing the Asian influence in Japan, that Zbigniew Brzezinski and David Rockefeller have a conversation on a plane, and that's how it originates. So clearly the Trilateral Commission, again, which is one of these more public organizations right now, is setting policy. We know that. And here they are clearly setting policy. And let's go over some of the topics, because there were a couple in here that were pretty alarming and in succession. I want to get your take on them. And those, to me, you had the big three, right? Ukraine, Russia, and China. They're going to be on the list. NATO challenges. You got the head of NATO there. All right. But continuity of government and the economy, disruption of the global financial system, and of course, disinformation in succession. Then you get into security and sustainability and post-pandemic health. The thing for me is continuity of government is shadow government involvement in the economy and the militarization of the economy. And that's something that's never been discussed in an open forum before in this country, and I would imagine probably not in your country as of recent. And when they're doing this on an international level on disruption of the global financial system, and these guys are out there, right now saying great reset, blockchain technology, social credit score. We're going to have this great new stakeholder system, stakeholder economy, UBIs, all these things. What are your thoughts on those topics?
Well, you've read number 8 on the list of disruption of the global financial system. That is kind of Schwab's great reset, isn't it? But and it's so interesting, that one before it, continuity of government and the economy. Like, continuity of government, just the phrase sets off all the alarms. But it's really hard to read it, as an outsider. But it does look like they're saying, okay, so here comes the Great Reset. There's going to be later on, there's fragmentation of democratic societies. So when everything shakes down, and geopolitical realignments occur, then you have this continuity of government and the economy. So they're sort of saying, I think, whatever hits the fan, they'll still be, in charge of the fan. So that whatever goes down, they want to, still be running some kind of economic, political consensus. In some kind of a, obviously it's hard to use the correct words, but in some kind of a deep state sort of a way. They're saying we're still going to be. I'm surprised it's continuity of government and not continuity of governance. That's what's all right. So I'm glad you said that, but that's what alarms me directly, because the continuity of government term is synonymous with the shadow government here in the United States. And as you know, Charlie, I know that you've seen some of my work.
It was really expanded upon via the Reagan and Bush administration through the National Programs Office. This is when the CIA and FEMA and the DoD all of a sudden have this joint unity. Of course, it was empowered even further, okay, post 9/11 via the Patriot Act and, of course, Homeland Security, and then into the fusion centers. And then, I'm not sure if you've seen, this is now a year old. We're working to get William Arkin on, but it is an elaborate piece inside the military secret undercover army that's been operating here for over a decade. Let me just read you the first paragraph and then show you some of the technology they use. The largest undercover force the world has ever known is the one created by the Pentagon. Over the past decade, some 60,000 people now belong to a secret army, many working under masked identities and in low profile, all part of a broad program called signature reduction. They later refer to it as an art form, as it's not an official program. The force, more than 10 times the size of the clandestine elements of the CIA, carries out domestic and foreign assignments, both in military uniform and under civilian cover, in real life and online, sometimes hiding in private businesses and consultancies, some of them household names. So in other words, front organizations and large corporations, companies, and many other things. Now let me just show you, when we're talking about actual privatized agents, we have now gotten to the point where it is public knowledge that you think you're looking at a hand right there, for the folks that are watching this on video. That is actually a skin-tight glove developed by DARPA that can have anybody's biometric information imprinted on it once they have that. And also, Charlie, another lovely fun fact, it also emits human oils. Now, this one, it'll take you about an hour to read, but it has had zero oversight. This is the only thorough piece I've seen on it anywhere, and thank goodness I'm in touch with the author. But these are the type of tools that have now gone beyond our system of checks and balances and really an executive within an executive. So when they talk about continuity of government, that specifically says to me United States. And we all know, Charlie, because the United States is still the #1 global economy and the culture that keeps most of the world moving and driving in a lot of ways. If that crashes, all bets are off.
Yeah, you've just reminded me of something, which is just a piece of like tiny bit of sort of gossipy level stuff, which is I was in LA like 5 years ago, whatever, doing some work. And I happened to have a meeting with a Hollywood producer type person, right? This lady who had just, she said, I wouldn't have taken the meeting except I've just literally resigned from being head of the organization. I'll have to go and look up the name of it. Mm-hmm. The organization which exists between Hollywood and the US intelligence services. And they brainstorm, they have brainstorming meetings. This is a genuine thing, right? I've forgotten the name. I'll have to go, it'll take me a while to go and find it. But she said, and I just remember her saying the kinds of things they would do. So they would, for example, because Hollywood has, you know, loads of film editors and stuff and film experts, so that if the intelligence service have a piece of footage that they don't understand or don't know what it's, whether it's been tampered with, whether it's been edited, how it's been edited, if there's any information that could come from it. And they said that these experts that from you know the film and TV industry would then give their expertise on it. And the example that the skin glove reminded me of is that she said, so the intelligence services will come to us with questions. And she said, so for example, they asked us, can you help us edit CCTV in live time? Can you edit a person out of surveillance footage in live time? That was their problem, right? And they said, okay, can you help solve this? I mean, it's mental. I was just sitting there, my head spinning at that, obviously, at this kind of thing. What? But anyway, sorry, we've veered a little bit off.
No, listen, man, those are the type of things that people don't really understand. They get locked up into this conservative, liberal, Republican, Democrat, right, mentality, and all sides are meeting here. You have intelligence services, prime ministers, a lot of AI this time around. But what we didn't have is even the type of media coverage that built up over the years that I would argue you starting to cover it in The Guardian and giving it some significance. All of a sudden now there was a CNBC article or an MSNBC article, and there were mainstream media people there. And in 2012, I would say, at least in this country, was the peak of protest. We had insiders all the way back then, like Jim Tucker, who were getting the location, even getting insiders that worked there, and maybe even members of Bilderberg leaking information to him. We certainly don't have that this time. Was it the 2-year layoff? I know that I was asking everybody, number one. I was traveling around. I just spoke at Myrtle Beach. Nobody. I was checking their website every single day. I know that Kriston T. Harris, I was in touch with him. He had emailed them. They said they would let him know as soon as they let everybody else know. And it seems like the day of, on Bilderberg, they announced it was in D.C. Took a little while during the day on Thursday to figure out where it was. By the evening, I found out it was at the Mandarin Hotel. I was texting people like Luke Rudowski, Rob Dew right away, Truth Stream Media, the Dykeses, anybody that's covered this in the past, and they had no clue. What are your thoughts on that? And take us through before we even get there, take us through the journey of how you started here, man, because a lot of people don't know.
Let me just say about that. On that point is that usually in the last sort of several years, they've released the location kind of 3 or 4 days ish in advance, but that's because we've already found out, I think. Mm-hmm. So I think they realized that no one had found out right where it is, and I think there's lots of different reasons for that. The kind of some of the people that generally do the digging didn't quite do, and I include myself in that, didn't really do due diligence this year. And they just suddenly, they're in the, and also what's really odd is I checked the Marriott Westfields, the book on booking.com, and that was available. So I kind of thought if they're going to be in Washington, and I sort of thought that was my first guess was Washington, right? But I guessed the wrong hotel and then didn't do any other checking stupidly. Mm-hmm. And but anyway, so they I think they realized no one has picked up on where it is, so they quietly carried on, and then just released it, almost so late that no one could really do much.
Well, I think that I think it's more than that, man. Because I believe that, again, this year had Alex Jones, for instance, even harped on it a week before, we could have got 1,000 people in the middle of D.C., maybe even mounted it to 2,000 by day 2, if it had been a big enough deal. Now, Alex may not want to have been there because the show trial for January 6th is literally coming up on Thursday evening here in the States, and they have a former ABC producer presenting it. We're in part 2. But then again, what do we also have in here? We have representatives from The Economist. Okay, you also have from The Atlantic, and even, first I want to get the origin story. He said we weren't even going to be able to rattle on for 30 minutes. That's a joke, folks. This guy, you don't even know. I want to talk about that. I want to talk about Kissinger being in reality with the Ukraine situation. I never thought I would be in agreement with Henry Kissinger, but what he said was at Davos was more in line with reality for me than what. And then you have The Atlantic on the other end, who is highly critical afterwards. They're represented there. But before we get into all that stuff, all right, because I think that if it was in the middle of D.C., right, it's not at the Marriott, and you get 1,000 people on one of those streets, man, that looks bad. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. That looks real. That looks a lot different than out in Chantilly, where it's kind of on the side of the road and you can manage it or whatever. I think that looks a little bad. And then you can also rally a lot of troops. I mean, what are your thoughts on that first?
It begs the question, why did they do it in the middle of DC? And the answer has to be the participant list is absolutely rammed with, Biden administration defense and intelligence officials, really, really high up ones, like the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, and, the head of their cybersecurity agency, Jen Easterly, and stuff. People that are really, really high up official spooks, like there's just a ton of Washington turned up.
And so Deputy Secretary, Department of the Treasury. Remember, a lot of economists. You had and again, you had your usuals here, right? So here's Baker's here as well, the Office of the Secretary of Defense, net assessment. You're not wrong, but then you also have what? Your Goldman Sachs's are still here. Your Hudson Institutes, your Carnegie endowments are still here as well. So you have a lot of the old guard, but you also had a lot of AI. For instance, the Facebook representative was from AI, and what Meta has been a big push. DeepMind's here. I see it as a merging of the guards, but at the same time, AI scientists, Facebook right there, because these systems, these Facebook systems, they always say they're private organizations, right, Charlie? Oh, they're Trojan horse civilian systems that are there as a safeguard to act like they're not government censorship and authoritarianism. And that's I mean, look at the contracts they're carrying out. I mean, that's my assessment, and I guess that's somewhat speculation, but you do the paperwork, that's exactly what's going on. And they're in secret meetings. They are there in official capacity, like I said. So yeah, Defense Department, economy, and then the old guard, right? European royalty and institutions of banking and industry.
But I really noticeable lot of AI this year. I mean, really, it's a big deal. And these are, they're the heads of their various organizations, and you've got OpenAI there, Sam Altman, and obviously Peter Thiel and Karp, and then you've got a board member from Microsoft as well as their chief technology officer, and and Jan LeCun, the guy from Facebook, so who's like a major AI thinker, and Reid Hoffman, who's there doing his various AI things. And so AI is really, and it's something I've said about Bilderberg is that and I think what's kept them like super relevant and right plugged in is they went really early into tech, I think, in terms of who they were inviting. And I think that's partly, so you had people like Craig Mundy, who was like Gates's right hand man at Microsoft. He was really early onto the board of Bilderberg, and then Eric Schmidt from Google was there, and then loads of Google came. And I watched a clip the other day of Alex Jones at Watford in 2013 talking about how he's calling it Googleberg, and it's been very googly for a lot of years, like less this year actually, but there's been some really big Google players. And obviously you've got Google DeepMind. I'm getting Demystify. So you got that. So anyway, and you've also got the fact that Henry Kissinger's just written a book on the age of AI with Eric Schmidt. So Kissinger, as you say, when he speaks, you should pay attention because he doesn't mince words. He might be a sociopathic war criminal, but he tends to tell you the truth. As he sees. And he's there. And he's not. He could be looking back over his glittering career as national security advisor and secretary of state. He's not. His eyes are firmly locked on the future. And it's for him. It's clearly artificial intelligence in China, and that's his obsession. He's like laser focused.
I'm surprised at what he said, but then again, I think that, like you said, he may be looking at his career. Nobody lives forever. The man's 99. If you had told me in 2012 he was going to be there in 2022, I wouldn't have believed you. But then again, I think Rockefeller made it all the way to 99 or 100 at those meetings. So maybe he's just trying to beat David so that when they can sort their bets out in the afterlife, you say, I got you. I want to talk about Google really quickly because you honed in on something. Google transitioned from this In-Q-Tel-funded, what I would argue, CIA-seeded search company to now a Leviathan, where if you would call it anything more than a monopoly, you would be a fool. Let me just explain why. Number one, folks, it has the number one search engine in the world. And we're talking about Alphabet, the organization that owns everything. Okay, Google is just one of the shells. So you have number one search engine in the world, Google. You have the number two search engine in the world, which is YouTube, which is also the number one video platform in the world, which they are allowed to censor whenever they want to. They also have the number one operating system in the world via Chrome on the most mobile devices, and now Chromebooks in schools everywhere. Yet, what are they really into? Well, if you look at this, they partnered with people like NASA, okay? Here's Michael Griffin, former CIA, former NASA administrator, for quantum supremacy, okay, all the way back in 2019. And then they are also into, even beyond AI, transhumanism and immortality. Calico is that is their division right here. And Ray Kurzweil has headed that up for over a decade. So again, these guys are what I talk about as consumer fronts for the type of technology the military industrial complex has had for some time. A lot of these people are the heads of organizations, aka upper level management of these systems. William Burns of the CIA also there. You know, we hadn't discussed that, head of the CIA. And they're there to distribute it and really use these Trojan horse civilian systems and psychological warfare in their post-truth world to manage global disruption financially and continuity of government programs, and apparently disfragmentation of democratic societies. It's pretty wild, man.
It's wild. And the language of the agenda this year it's a different tone to it. It felt kind of a little bit shrill, and you know, there was like they had realignment, the word realignment's twice, and everything's fragmenting. There's deglobalization. You know, these are the kind of high priests of globalization as they've been described, and they're talking now about deglobalization. You can see there's a shift has happened. You know, they're talking about the Great Reset and disruption of the global financial system.
Well, I think when they talk about deglobalization, I think when they're really talking about, because it's trade and deglobalization. So it's how do we maintain the resources and consolidate the infrastructure, right, as we break down global supply chains, or as they break down. Of course, they would never do it purposely, Charlie, but as global supply chains break down and then manage these societies so at the end of the day, all the resources are within our control of global governance, and all of the trade is. And now, because we control when and where the supply chains go, we can have quote unquote sustainability and shortages whenever we want. You know, a lot of these shortages that we've seen via the supply chain are not that they're purposeful. Let's be honest. You know, they're not because they were, you know, there was something wrong in the distribution. And no, they were sabotaged in many cases globally. And that should alarm everybody, especially in westernized societies. And that's what's so sick, is that that's not being discussed more. This is the meeting where they're clearly discussing it, and the media didn't touch it. I mean, dude, they didn't touch it with a 10-foot pole this year. You were it.
It was crazy. When it was really odd to see just, you know, Josh Friedman and then later Luke Rudowski outside the gates. When you compare back in, like, I don't know, 2013, we had literally thousands of people there. There were like, they turned away 2,000 or 3,000 people, and there were like 2,000 or 3,000 in that kind of strange paddock around the Watford Hotel. And we had an MP, Michael Meacher, God rest his soul, who was doing live interviews with Sky News from there. I mean, that's how big it was. You know, we had the time. I went around with a reporter from the Times, who then stitched me up, but never mind that. But you know what I mean. But what was it? It was full. It was full of media, and it was just, there were TV, there was radio, BBC, local news. Everyone was there. It was crazy, and now it's like two guys, and it's worse than when I turned up in 2009. Mm-hmm. It was sort of similar in one sense. Was the only reason I went there at all to Vulikmania in 2009 was that there was one reference on one kind of chat board thing. Where someone had said, I think it's in Vulikmania. And I got on a plane on the basis of it and just thought, and I was wandering around this town going, I don't even know what's going on. Why am I here? Is it even here? And then I just turned the corner and saw, you know, the limos and the machine guns. And I was going, oh, right, okay, I'm in the right place.
So talk about that for a second, because, you know, this isn't traditionally, you know, what you've talked about your entire life. You're kind of a comedian. You're a funny guy. And nobody's covering this thing, and you literally went into this kind of as a gag, as a joke, but really at the end of the day you found out the joke was on us. Tell us about that first journey.
Well, I will. Just to contextualize it, I remember in about 2 years after that, whatever it was, 2011, I think, in St. Moritz, I persuaded a couple of documentary makers from the BBC to come over just to see it. You know, kind of like, I was friends with them, I was working on a TV show with them, and they said, okay, we'll come over. And it blew their minds, because they work in like news. they couldn't understand. They were looking at this thing, and this, I remember this documentary maker was saying, I don't understand. I'm looking at this, and I turn around, and I expect to see the banks of all the cameras and the live trucks, reporting on it, and they just aren't there. And it's that the absence of them is really wild when you think about the stuff that's going on in this meeting.
CEO of Pfizer. He sat with Klaus Schwab a week ago, bro, for 30 plus minutes. He literally has influence through the biomedical global state of the world right now, through the World Health Organization. He's there with all these people. There was another, I forget who the other big pharma representative. They're there. No one's talking about. But again, in the other respect, a week ago, he's with Klaus and the boys. There's hundreds of people in the room, full media coverage, and I can watch the video. Why wouldn't it be important for us to know what they're talking about, quote unquote, in private, especially just because they say it's not in official capacity? It's insanity. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt, but it's nuts. Go ahead.
No, it's insane that when you've got the head of NATO there meeting with, the Prime Minister of Finland, which you would think any foreign correspondent would go, oh, okay, well, that's pretty significant. Do you know what? That's something worth covering. Even just factually referring to just logging it, as a thing taking place in the general whirl of geopolitics. Just that. You don't even if they didn't speculate any more than simply saying it was occurring. But it didn't get that. And I mean, I remember in now, where was it? In Montreux, the previous one in 2019. It was really, I often get this feeling if I go there, of slight sort of kind of dystopian giddiness, where, this is Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, turned up. There was rumors that he was going to turn up, and then suddenly the world's biggest motorcade turned up. I've never seen anything like it in my life, and pulled into the front of the hotel, and then he went off on a riverboat to deliver the keynote speech at some lakeside hotel.
Yeah, and C-SPAN and a bunch of cameras were there, bro. That's what you're saying. Like, and it actually this is actually C-SPAN footage. Anybody can watch this. Him actually going down to the boat where he'll be speaking at a castle about foreign policy. There he is right there.
And you've honestly had, because they had the head of NATO, they had the Secretary of State, the US Secretary of State, and they had the German Defense Secretary, Ursula von der Leyen, before she went on to bigger things even. And you've just so much security. It was extraordinary. But yes, you've got the C-SPAN there, but when they went onto the boat, they're sort of waving, and it was this beautiful kind of sunny late afternoon, and there really was just the alt media there. Really, it was kind of giddying that it just wasn't anyone from the mainstream media. So anyway, look, I mean, it's obviously people speculate on why the mainstream media can't get their act together and report on it, and whether it's some, obviously there's one end of the sort of theorizing about this would be that strings are pulled and stories are quashed, etc., etc. I'm more pragmatic, I think, in my understanding of it, which is that the media just can't do it. They can't get their heads around how to report on this thing. There isn't any information given to them, so they go, okay, I'm not going to. I'm not being spoon-fed my story. I'm not being given my footage and my my images and the little write-up that's given to me. So I'm just not going to do it. I think and then they've got out of the habit of it. It's just easier not to report on it for them.
I mean, I see that, but the media are cowards. I'm just going to say that, man. So, recently I gave a speech about Elon Musk, how he's not the best guy, how he's another one of these defense contractor frontmen, again, involved with DARPA, the blackjack system, actually being called out by the Russian government as arming them with Starlink and beyond, because they're utilizing Starlink with the Sidewinder and Ghost drones to actually hit tanks and other targets. I mean, these are a reality. This is real warfare. And he's goading them on social media and actually having interactions. Not a great guy. Also transhumanism. I think that's why we're seeing Kissinger in his throes kind of backing what Eric Schmidt and others have been talking about, which now is the next step, which are automation, robotization, and basically transhumanism. Us eventually merging with these machines. I know it sounds wild, but it's on all their paperwork and they're talking about it. And like I said, Calico exists for a reason, the immortality division at Google. So, you know, I'm giving these speeches and telling people this, and they have no idea. They can't grasp it, right? And so I get a call from somebody at the New Yorker, okay? And I'm talking, and these are journalists, you know, man. I don't have any hate. I got a lot of love. I just tell them straight up, if we're going to talk, I'm going to tape the conversation. And I happen to be driving back to Iowa. So normally I make them tape the conversation. And then if it's like a piece about me or loose change or any of that stuff, they have to come on my show and face the music, or I put out the full interview, right? I think that's fair. But with this woman, I said, look, I'm just going to tape it. Don't treat me wrong, and I won't have to put it out. You know what I mean? I already know this is going to be a hit piece about the whole event. And we were just talking, and, you know, she knew who I was. And basically, you know, in not so many words, I don't want to blow too much up, but she said there are certain things she certainly agreed with me about, but she did not want to come forward and say that or take that position because she was scared that what was done to me and others like me would be done to her. And I think that's a lot of them. I mean, a lot of these people are looking out for their careers, and there's a line that you don't cross, even if the information and the evidence is taking you there, right, Charlie? I mean, that there has to be some level of cognitive dissonance and not just collusion with the media that's inside, correct?
Well, you just remind, you know, I mentioned back in 2013 the guy from the Times that stitched me up. So this is a guy, Valentine Lowe, which is I might as well name and shame him. I knew him. I literally knew him socially, and I said, "Come along." He came along, but he wrote a horrible thing and the most sort of boring, you know, lizards and wild conspiracies and stuff. And I couldn't believe it. I'd literally spent, you know, 2 hours walking around talking about the geopolitics of the whole event.
Because you know how much me and you talk about lizards, bro. Like me and you, that's when we're alone. That's all we say. By the way, that's all we talk about. Like we have this special camera. We haven't disclosed it yet, but back in the good old days, we were used to take pictures and get videos and put them out there because we were at these things in high def. What we really had is the lizard cam, right? One day when we finally can, we're going to put it out there on our deathbeds who the real lizards are. But that's the insider scoop. I mean, it's absurd. Like you said, these are prime ministers. These are kings and queens and secretaries of defense and NATO people. And they want to talk lizards, Charlie.
Yeah, but what I was going to say about what Valentine Lowe said, he had the gall to email me to apologize for writing a hit piece, right? And said, sorry, it's just what they wanted at the Times. And which I sort of believe him, but also, you know, fuck you.
Yeah, I know, I believe him too. But like, it's like, hey, guys, it's Dopner again. He's the CEO of Axel Springer. He's the steering committee member. He's there. He's setting policy. No one's saying he's a lizard or looks like a lizard, but it's always that. They want to talk about Bigfoot and UFOs. Just
fucking take it seriously. That's all I've ever said. From all the time I've been doing it, it's just take it seriously. You don't have to take it. You don't even have to speculate wildly. Just accord it the same level of respect that the people going obviously accorded. You know, these are people who, you know, these are heads of banks and large organizations and heads, European commissioners and et cetera, you know, ministers and prime ministers. There's 2 prime ministers there, and they're taking, you know, 4 days or whatever out of their schedule, and they're all managing to hit the same 4 days, and they're all going to the center of Washington. You know, they're taking it seriously. The head of NATO takes it seriously. So why can't the mainstream media take it seriously? It fries my tiny little mind.
So I know your time is precious, my friend. Kind of wrapping it up. One of the more humorous things I found about this was, again, you made the connection that Karp had just met with who? Zelenskyy. And then you kind of joked that Zelenskyy would probably be there in a Zoom meeting, right? And like kind of tongue in cheek, right? But I don't think that you're that far off. And there could have been that possibility. He has gone on his online tour. And then I got sent this really quickly last night. Join Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy at the Global Boardroom. The Financial Times decided that they were going to put on a live seminar with some other great people right here as well. Hold on, let's bring it all the way up so Charlie can see it here. And it's almost like that was probably the truth. I haven't looked for some overlap, but there may be some over there, okay? And the journalists are down there.
Yeah, I can't, it's a bit blurry, but I'll have to go and look at this.
Yeah. Basically, we got, what is it? Kwasi Qatar, Secretary of State of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy of the UK. Prime Minister of Lithuania is there. Prime Minister of Latvia is there. Christina Riley, CEO of Deutsche Bank, is going to be there. Zhang Yongchang, Deputy Director General World Trade Organization. So it's just funny to me that just days later there is kind of like this Financial Times global Zoom summit for him to kind of entrench this. Hey, we're in Ukraine for the long haul. Doesn't matter how the American people feel about it. Doesn't matter how the British people feel about it. This is going on, and we're pressing forward.
I should say, for the record, the media representative from Bilderberg actually contacted me after my piece went out to say that Zelenskyy, there was no plans for Zelenskyy to zoom in, and so he wanted to clarify that. So I was just being a little bit, tongue in cheek, and
I thought it was tongue in cheek, right? I got it. I laughed. I that was a joke to me. That was one of those moments, man. But you never know.
Yeah. But anyway, so so I have this strange, email conversation, long time email relationship with the media representative of Bilderberg. We have slightly ridiculous conversations, but I have a feeling I got him slightly in trouble this year with that joke, or remark, at least let's call it. Anyway, just to clarify, he said that Zelenskyy didn't, and I kind of believe him. That's just, I shouldn't say that I believe, but I do. I think he plays relatively straight. I think they do. It's a weird one. They mainly just don't say anything. That's their main modus operandi. It's just to not really say anything, But then they do put out the agenda and the participant list, and that alone you can draw. Members of the media from the Times and the Telegraph, New York Times, Washington Post should be able to write something on the basis of that.
It's amazing and astounding that they don't. I'm disappointed that we didn't get together. I would have loved to be on the scene. I'm disappointed that it didn't get, because I still haven't seen, again, a lot of people in this country want to talk about Tucker Carlson. No one's come to save you in the mainstream media. No one's covered this. I mean, not one. And that was the other thing. We were also getting not only news clips, but some in-depth 5 to 10 minute stories. Whether the media was kind of smearing it or not, they were acknowledging it. And whether that was Sky News or the BBC or ABC or NBC here, it was at least happening. And none of that this year. No mention, and no mention from the supposed truth tellers in the conservative media, and even the alt media. I don't think we went as hard as we should have, especially with the gravity of the situation right now and the players involved. But you did at least the most poignant piece of the year. Charlie Skelton, tell people where they can find all your stuff and support you. He puts out hilarious jokes on Twitters about fat fingers, folks. I saw that one go viral. Very happy with that. I love it when you pick on royalty, especially, guys, if you didn't know, he lives in a country where people line up in the streets so that they can see a hologram of the Queen pass by. I mean,
yeah, I got my first Twitter suspension. This is I'm Deyuk, DEYOOK on Twitter, and I got my first Twitter suspension just on the first day of Bilderberg, bizarrely, for a joke I made about the Queen, which I was speculating, obviously as a joke, about beheading the royal family and executing them.
Yikes! And
it was regarded as an incitement to violence. And I thought, well, it wasn't really. I mean, at a push, it was an incitement to revolution, but that would be a stretch. But anyway, so yeah, that was my first time I've ever got in trouble with Twitter.
I mean, it's just absolutely absurd.
Oh, wait, before we wrap up, I got to say one thing.
Yes.
I got to say. Look, we can do better next year. They book the hotel 18 months in advance, right? So the hotel is already booked, and it's almost certainly in Europe. It's a 5-star hotel. If I was a betting man, I'd say Scandinavia or Portugal, but I don't know. But we should talk at some point about how to crowdsource or whatever, the swarm across this information and find it, because somewhere in Europe is a 5-star hotel with a block booking, probably at the end of May or the beginning of June, and already booked out. So people could have a little rootle around.
I love it, man.
And it'll be booked out from Wednesday to Sunday.
Excellent, man. I really do appreciate it, and I appreciate your insight. And it's been far too long. Again, we do have to do better. And I think I got my passport. So, God willing, as long as I'm able to travel, I'm going to go and cover it next year as well, because it really is important. Charlie Skelton, thank you, brother. It's been a pleasure.
See you later.
There he is, everybody. Charlie Skelton. That was amazing. I have so much fun when I talk to that guy. We could have talked for hours, but he's a family man. He's got things to do. He's across the pond. Here's how you support Jason Bermas. Okay, number one, thumbs it up, subscribe, and share. We're still on YouTube. Okay, we're still here. They kick me off constantly. You can still get all the documentary films free right there. Loose Change, Final Cut, Fabled Enemies, Invisible Empire, A New World Order Defined, and Shade the Motion Picture. Okay, but please consider buying me a coffee. $5, $10, $15. It means the world to me. That's one way to support me. We're over on Rockfin Uncensored. That's where you can find all my broadcasts uncensored. At least make the free account. If you do subscribe and you endorse me, you hit that subscribe button behind me. It's $9.99 a month or $99.99 for the year. People like Frank's Analysis, who went down to Bilderberg 2012. They have premium content on here. They have a lot of free content too. He does great work. Max Blumenthal, The Gray Zone. He has premium content on here. He went down to Bilderberg this year. Okay? I want to thank people for the tips. Vampy, thank you so much for that tip. Over on the Rockfin, watching over there. We're on Podbean. We got an RSS feed. Not just audio. We've also got vidcasts on here, which is convenient. You can also call in when we stream live to the Bean. We're rumbling right now, live and uncensored. But I will say this. Rumble has demonetized a bunch of my videos. Not that I'm making any money on Rumble, folks, but say the ones that sometimes do get some views because they're embedded over at media organizations or whatever. Nope. So great. Let's grow Rumble. Let's get to 1,000 subscribers. I want to thank Odyssey for backing up my YouTube channel. And again, Loose Change, Final Cut, Fabled Enemies, Invisible Empire, A New World Order Defined, and Shade the Motion Picture are free. I want you to watch them. I want you to share them. And that's how you can help right now. No financial support necessary, just spreading the love and information. You want to learn about Bilderberg? Shade the Motion Picture features Charlie Skelton. We did a bit of a watch-along earlier this week, back in 2012, talking about these issues. You want more insight, please check out that film. I love you guys, and I will see you on the flip side.